Now, before we talk about how to automate Treasury work, we need to talk about why most Treasury automation efforts quietly fail. Not in a dramatic crash and burn way, but in a much more dangerous way, where something gets built, a lot of time spent, it's partially used, and then it's slowly abandoned. Most automation efforts fail because they start with tools instead of starting with thinking. Someone says, we should use Power Automate, or we should use AI. And then they try to bolt that onto an existing workflow. That workflow was already messy, undocumented, and full of exception. And this approach almost never works. So this course is different because we don't start with tools. We start with how Treasury work actually functions in the real world. If you work in Treasury, your day probably feels reactive because you don't control when bank files arrive. You don't control when someone suddenly wants a cash update. And you definitely don't control when leadership asks, are we good on liquidity today? So it feels chaotic. But that chaos is mostly about timing, not structure. Underneath the timing noise, Treasury work is extremely predictable. Think about your daily liquidity process. You look at the same bank accounts. You consolidate balances the same way. You apply the same thresholds. And you send roughly the same output every day. And that predictability is exactly what makes Treasury automation possible. Automation doesn't require perfection. What it requires is patterns. Every Treasury process, with no exceptions, can be broken into 4 parts: inputs, triggers, decisions, and outputs. And once you learn to see your work through that lens, automation stops being abstract and starts being obvious. Inputs are simply the information you start with, such as bank statements, ERP cash reports, investment position files, and policy documents that define what's allowed and what isn't. And if you open it, download it, or copy and paste it, it's an input. And here's the really key insight. If a human can read it, AI can usually read it too. Now, triggers answer a very simple question, which is when the work starts. Whether that's every morning at 8 a.m., whether that's when a bank file hits a folder, or when a balance drops below a minimum. And most Treasury teams already run on triggers. They just don't call them that. So automation is really just formalizing what you're already doing informally. Decisions are where Treasury expertise lives, such as deciding whether a balance is too low, whether a movement is unusual, or whether an investment is within policy. And here's the critical distinction. Automating decisions does not mean removing judgment. It means automating the logic so humans can focus on exceptions instead of scanning everything manually. Now, outputs are what the rest of the organization sees. Whether that's a liquidity summary, an alert about a cash movement, or a compliance report. And automation succeeds when those outputs show up consistently, without reminders, without follow-ups, and without you being the bottleneck. People love to sell automation as time savings, and time savings do matter. But in Treasury, the real value is in risk reduction, because manual processes introduce errors. Delayed visibility introduces risk. And tribal knowledge? Well, that creates key person dependencies. And automation can help you reduce all 3, with time savings as an added side effect. So if a Treasury task is repetitive, rule-based, and produces a predictable output, it's a strong automation candidate. Whether that's daily liquidity checks, cash threshold monitoring, or policy compliance reviews, and automating this work doesn't reduce your value. It actually makes your judgment more visible because you're only pulled in when it actually matters. Now, one common misconception to clear up is that AI is an automation, when in reality, AI is a thinking tool that helps you reason more clearly about messy processes, while the execution still happens in simple, reliable tools. And that separation is especially important in Treasury. Treasury teams should use AI the same way a strong analyst uses a whiteboard, to redesign workflows, to identify where errors creep in, to clarify rules that live in people's heads, and to structure decisions so they can be automated safely. Most teams try to automate the wrong things first. They start with the shiny stuff, the interesting stuff. I'm going to walk you through my favorite filter for automation. Eliminate, simplify, automate. Before you build anything, you need to make sure the work is actually worth automating. Here's the reality. Automation does not fix a bad process. It just makes the chaos happen faster. So the eliminate, simplify, automate framework helps us clean house first. Eliminate. Stop automating junk work. Eliminate is the most underrated step in finance. We spend months automating reports that nobody reads. So ask yourself, who actually uses this report? What decision does it drive? If I stopped sending it, who would notice? If the answer is nobody, congratulations. You just saved yourself a quarter of your workload by not building an agent for it. Here's an example. A region-level cost center roll forward that 3 people skim and no one acts on. They can use the higher-level report. Simplify. Reduce complexity before you automate. Simplify is where your agent starts winning. If your process feels like a bowl of spaghetti, multiple data sources, 17 exceptions, 3 versions of truth, don't hand that mess to AI. You'll get insane results. Simplify means combining reports, standardizing naming conventions, removing unnecessary steps, and tightening logic. Agents thrive when the process is clean. Here's an example. Instead of mapping 200 accounts manually, consolidate them with a short mapping table the agent can use. What's left is your gold mine for agents. Once you eliminate junk and simplify the rest, what remains is automation-ready work. These are things that are recurring, rule-based, structured, with predictable inputs and predictable outputs. These are perfect for AI agents. An example is a monthly variance commentary. It's the same structure, the same cadence, with new data in a similar format each month. It's ideal for automation. Here's how to choose a good candidate. First, there must be clear inputs. If the inputs change every week, you'll hate yourself. Choose something with predictable structure, like P&L exports, bank files, forecast assumptions, reconciliations, or policy documents. Make sure it has clear rules and logic. If the process involves a lot of, well, it depends, automation gets harder. Look for workflows with thresholds, classifications, steps, or policies the agent can follow. Number 3, clear outputs. Great agents produce things like commentary, summaries, alerts, compliance checks, tables, and decisions. Make sure the output you're looking for is clear. Number 4, high frequency equals a high return on investment. The more often you do it, the more valuable automation becomes. Daily, weekly, monthly, that's the sweet spot. You're not going to get the same benefit out of quarterly or annual. Number 5, a high time cost. If it takes 20 hours, a perfect automation target. The thing is, most Treasury risk lives in tribal knowledge, in statements like, we just know when something looks wrong. And that works until someone is out, someone leaves, or gets pulled into another fire. And that's where automation forces clarity. And clarity itself becomes a control. If you remember one thing from this module, make it this. Automation is a design problem. And once the process is clear, the tools are easy. But if the process is messy, no tool will save you. That's why the next module focuses entirely on process mapping, where we'll take real Treasury processes and map them in a way any automation tool can run. What you have to remember is that this is the step most teams skip, and this is the reason most automations fail. So there's no way we're skipping it. Let's move on to Module 2.